All right, so a very good evening to you all, and this is your brother and friend Joshua of the New African Concept, and as we always do on Wednesdays, we dedicate it for taking or going through some lessons, whilst on Mondays we treat that of the fact checkers, and then on Fridays we also look at On Fridays, we take a look at the extended edition or version of the Voice of Reformation. So today being Wednesday, all this while we've been studying on the church, on the concept of the church, ecclesia, what it stands for, what it seeks to achieve, and then how different the contemporary church we are conducting our things, and then our focus, and then all. Today, I want to share briefly with you something very important. I mean, it may be quite technical, but it is not too much. But the focus is to extract the principle behind it, and then compare it to ourselves and in our practical lives, and then see if we are going by that way of life. It is called the principle of Babylon. The principle of Babylon. I think if you are a student of the Bible, the word Babylon wouldn't be new to you. After all, when we mention Babylon, one of the things that comes to mind is Nebuchadnezzar, who happened to be one of the powerful monarchs or kings of Babylon. He took over from his father Nabopolassar, and then but he became much more prominent and then more forceful. Yeah, so at least Babylon, we can track him and then make mention of him. In the book of Revelation 2, we know the label that Babylon the Great has fallen. That Babylon the Great has fallen. And we also have that. I think one of the other common place that we see Babylon is also in Genesis chapter 11, which we popularly call the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel. Now, in biblical interpretations, there is what we call the principle of first mention. The principle of first mention talks of the very first time this particular thing or an element was mentioned in the scriptures. So the principle of first mention is very key, and it helps us to understand. It helps us to understand the context, or it helps us to understand how it was first used, and then we can always refer to, the original context in which it was used, to help explain. So the very first time the word Babylon comes or appears in the Bible is actually at this point, which is very key if we are to go by the principle of first mention. So quickly, let's read the book of Genesis chapter 11, and then we'll read some verses of it, and then I strongly believe that we are going to learn something out of it. So turn our Bibles to Genesis chapter 11, reading from verse 1. It says that, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. Now, one other thing is that when you are reading the Old Testament, especially, you must read it with a particular understanding. And when you are reading the New Testament, it also comes with a particular understanding. You must understand that the Old Covenant or the Old Testament was given as a precursor to the realities. So the New Covenant or the New Testament is the manifestation of the promises, the ideas, the promises of the Old Covenant or the Old Testament. So in the Old Testament, most of the things that were happening were external and physical. But in the New Covenant, it is internal and spiritual. So when you read Ephesians chapter 1, verse 1 and 2, verse 2, he talks of the fact that for we have been blessed with all spiritual blessings in Christ Jesus. We have been blessed with all spiritual blessings in Christ Jesus, which means that the New Covenant has its focus to be things which are internal and things which are spiritual. And in the Old Covenant was just a physical representation of deep spiritual realities. Understanding this balance is very key. The Old Covenant or the Old Testament were having things which were physical. So it was only a physical representation or a physical demonstration of deeper spiritual realities. So what it means is the various engagements, the various places, the various laws, and the various beliefs and practices of the Old Testament or the Old Covenant, they were just precursors, or they were external or physical demonstration of deeper spiritual realities. It is very key and critical for you to understand that. Else, many believers don't know what to do, because to them it is a bit of a sharp contrast when they see the Old Testament and then the New Testament, and then that should be your approach. The Old Testament or the Old Covenant was only a shadow of things to come. It is not the main thing. It was given as a physical demonstration to dramatize the realities of the New Covenant. So you are not to take things on face value. When you see that the Israelites are warring against the Jebusites, the Moabites, the Philistines, the Hittites, and then all, you don't have to just take it on the face value of just battle, and then it is just a physical representation. That is why now Paul had to come by way of Revelation, to say that for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. Unlike our forefathers, whose battles were physically, demonstrated through the external battle with the Philistines, today in the New Covenant, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. But the same principles that were used in the physical battle, now it will be the same principle, but now our battles are against what? Are spiritual. They are against, spiritual wickedness in high places. So that is the contrast. That which the Old Testament physically presents, the New Testament or the New Covenant has its real manifestation. Old Covenant, external, physical. New Covenant, internal, spiritual. Understanding that is very key. So as we read this short story of the Tower of Babel, that is what we must have at the back of our mind. These things might have happened, physically, but then they were to teach deeper spiritual realities. So he said that in the whole earth, we are reading from Genesis chapter 11. When you come on board, you do well and then share, so that people can also, a lot of people can also get to know. Genesis chapter 11 verse 1. He says, and the whole earth was one, of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain. Verse 3. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. Now, it is of very much importance that, so we have these people, and then now they decided to put up a tower. Now, as they decided to put up this tower, what they did was that he said that, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And look at how the Bible put it. And they had brick for stone. In other words, instead of using stone, they used bricks. And then the binding agent, Instead of using mortar, they use slime. Other versions uses asphalt or bitumen. Now, as I said, the Old Testament are just physical representations, so we cannot take it at the face value. It definitely means something much more than just the external brick or stone. But the context here makes it clear that instead of, that is in verse 3, they decided that we want to put up a tower, and then instead of using stones, they use bricks. And with a binding agent, instead of using mortar, they used bitumen, or they use slime. Now, that is the first lesson. There are 2 or 3 lessons that we will pick. Remember that we want to see the principles behind the construction of Babylon. Babylon as a principle. And then we will compare it to our personal lives, and then I think we'll be done for today. So the first thing is that, you see, God had given them, or in God's view, when you are putting up an altar, God gave them that they should use stones. In constructing an altar, a raised platform, an elevated land, that is where they were having sacrifices. So all through the scriptures, especially in the Old Testament, God gave them strict laws. When during even the times of Moses, when they are to build an altar, they were to use uncut stones. The reason why they were to use uncut stones, you see, stones then the uncut stones represents divinity, or the God factor, divinity. Because you don't have to process stone, it is natural, and you don't even have to cut it. You just have to use the natural stone as it is, not a stone that have been processed by man, but rather an uncut stone. So God gave them the commandment that in raising altars or building towers, or in raising staffs, they were to use stones which were even uncut. This is to demonstrate. Uncut stone talks of what? Fully divine, which means what nature has itself presented without the intervention of humanity, without the intervention of man. What divinity actually presents is what we are to use. And for them, instead of using stones, they use bricks. Now, bricks, there is nothing wrong technically in the use of bricks for building. Even now we have buildings of bricks, and we know how strong that they are. But we are talking of the context of understanding and revelation. So bricks, you know that bricks are processed by man. So here it is talking about using our own strength, or operating from self rather than operating from God. Stones represents operation from divinity or God, and then the bricks represents man or self, operating from oneself. So when they wanted to put up this tower, instead of using stones, which happens to be God's order for building altars and towers and houses, instead of using stones, which represent divinity, which is uncut stone, something that has not been, there is no interruption or invasion of the weakness of humanity, these guys rather chose to use bricks, which have been processed. And bricks have been processed, which is from self, as against divinity. And again, for the binding agent, instead of using mortar, they use slime or bitumen. Now, mortar, when you read, when you read Jeremiah chapter 18, where God told Jeremiah to go to the potter's house, it was a demonstration. So the raw clay is a demonstration of the fact that God, it is representing the work of God in the life of man. So God told Jeremiah that he should go to the potter's house, and then whatever he saw, he was telling Jeremiah that, can't I do this with the house of Israel? In other words, I desire to mold man, to mold Israel into my image. So just as the potter, knowing what he wants, can be remolding and breaking and remolding, I can do the same with Israel. Unfortunately, Israel, they are resisting my presence, to mold them. So the binding agent that God has given them is mortar. Mortar represents the handiwork of God, or God's working in the life of man. They rather use bitumen, they rather use asphalt, they rather use slime, which talks of affections. It talks of affections. So the first aspect talks of the mindset. The mindset. Instead of using the divine or the righteous mindset, which is stones, they use the self mindset, the selfish mindset, or the humanism that is trying to be ourselves, which is bricks. Then again, the binding agent represents the affections or the desire. Instead of using mortar, which represents the desire of God, or in other words, the desire of God in molding his hands or molding his work in man, they were rather using slime, and slime represents evil affections. So mortar represents righteous desire, righteous affections. And then, slime represents evil affections. And that was evil affections means that operating from self. So let us go. I know it is a bit quite technical, but let us flow so that we get to the main point. Verse 4. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. So now we have seen the manifestation of what they were doing. I've told you that instead of using stone, which represents divinity, they rather use bricks, which represents self, that is man. And that is the starting point, being man. And then number 2, instead of using the binding agent mortar or clay, which represents the hand of God in man, or in other words, you can talk of the righteous desire or righteous affections, they rather use bitumen or asphalt or slime, which represents evil affections. That is the desire of man, or the evil affections. And then they said that let us build a tower so that we will make a name for ourselves. So 2 things. Let us build ourselves a city and a tower. A city talks of mindset. Tower talks of worship. Anytime you hear tower, that is why whenever they were to conduct sacrifices, they were conducting it on elevated platforms, like a raised altar. Altars were raised, towers were raised. So a tower is an elevated platform, and then in the Bible it represents worship or sacrifice. Please, when you come on board, do well and share. Indicate your presence. You can leave a comment or 2 and then share it to others who also hear it. Let us flow gradually. We are, getting to a main point. So they said that let us build for ourselves a city and let us build for ourselves a tower. When we talk of a city represents a mindset. A city set on a hill. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. It talks of what? It talks of a mindset. And this is a selfish mindset. And then a tower talks of what? A place of elevation. Elevated platform where we worship, where we conduct sacrifices, just like altars, where we conduct sacrifices. We are talking of the principle of Babylon. And now we've seen 4 things. 1, we've seen that in Babylon, in constructing Babylon, they use, bricks. instead of stones. Stones, uncut stones, were the commandment of God for what they were to use in building, but they used bricks. And uncut stones represents divinity, bricks represents humanity, the selfishness of man. And then number two, we've seen that in the construction of Babylon, the binding agent, which represents the desire or the affections or the heart of man, instead of using mortar, which represents the work of God in man or righteous affections, they use bitumen or asphalt or slime, which represents evil affections or the affections of self. Number three, when they came together, I said, let us build for ourselves a city, which represents the mindset. The mindset. So we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but we wrestle against spiritual wickedness in high places. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but they are mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. Strongholds. So that is the mindset, and casting down every imagination that raises itself against the knowledge of Christ, and bringing everything under the obedience of Christ. So when we talk of city, we are talking of a mindset. So when we talk of that, the devil or Satan is the god of the cities or the god of this world, then we are talking of the fact that he is the architect, he is the chief engineer behind the mindset, a particular mindset. That is the mindset or the wisdom of the world, as against the mindset of God, the divine mindset. So when we talk of the city, a city could be Babylon or it could be Zion. To build the city of Zion means that to have the mindset of God, and to build the city of Babylon means that to have the mindset of the world or of the devil. And number four, he said that let us also raise a tower. And I said that a tower is an elevated platform, just like an altar where sacrifices are conducted, where it is a place of worship. In other words, it is a place of expressing religion or the worship of God or sacrificing unto God. And what was the motive? So that we will make a name for ourselves. So Babylon deals with making a name for ourselves. We've already said that it is because it is stemming from the place of man, not God. So we will make a name for ourselves. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all, and then let us scatter. And then they scattered it, and then all. Verse 9, he said, therefore is the name called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of the earth. So what am I driving at? What I'm driving at is simple. The principle of Babylon, is the use of worship. Now, this is the main thing, and I want to take my time to explain this so that you get it very well. The principle of Babylon is the use of religion or the use of worship, or the use of the things of God to meet personal or selfish interests. I'm taking it again. The principle of Babylonia or Babylon is the use of worship, and the worship comes from the place of the tower, which represents an elevated platform where sacrifices are conducted, where God is worshipped. It's just like mountains. That is why they were worshiping on several mountains. So when you hear tower, when you hear mountains, when you hear altars, all these are represented in the Old Testament. They are figurative. They represent elevated platforms where they worshipped. So Abraham, whenever he wanted to worship, when he wanted to sacrifice Isaac, he had to go to what? A mountain. So a mountain, a tower an altar. All these are elevated platforms. It represents a place of worship. It represents a place of sacrifice. So Babylon, the principle of Babylon is the use of worship, is the use of church, is the use of religion to serve personal interest. Babylon is the use of religion, is the use of worship, is the use of the things of God to serve personal, parochial interest. Because they were to serve their interest. What they were doing was not for the glory of God. They were not saying that let us put up this structure so that we will glorify God or God will get his glory from it. He said that let us do that so that we will get a name for ourselves, personal interest, personal elevation above God. Let us do this so that we will get a name for ourselves, the honor of men, the fame of men. Christianity is not, the essence of Christianity is not for the happiness of man, but the essence of Christianity is for the glory of God. Anything you are doing in the name of God or in the name of religion or in the name of the church, that is, or in the name of worship, that is not having the glory of God at the epicenter. You are operating with the principle of Babylon. Anytime you are doing something, whether for God or in the house of God or in the name of worship, in the name of Christianity, but then the very epicenter, the foundational element is not based on the glory of God. And yes, said the beya onyankopon ebenya nanim onyame firi mu na emom said the beya wono you will get a name for yourself, just as the guys in the Tower of Babel wanted to do, so that you get a name for yourself, so that you get fame, so that it will meet your personal needs. That is the system called Babylon. Enti impempi de eya ye kan e Bible no mu a eya na we gloss over it. We think that and one say and then God confounded. No, it is teaching a deeper spiritual truth. So God's reaction towards Babylon is that he scatters it. To scatter something means to destroy. You can say something is scattered. At first it was a hole, just like a boom to say ukra glass na ato form na askata. Anytime God sees Babylon, his approach to it is that he scatters it. He scatters it. And this is the principle. So many years later, thousands of years later, we had King Nebuchadnezzar coming as the king of Babylon. And what was he doing? He said he put up a golden image or a golden statue, and then because he was literally the president of the world, conquering 127 provinces. And then he said that anytime that you hear the sound of the trumpet, everyone should what? Bow. And the image was literally representing himself. Is God not so powerful and wonderful? In fact, understanding the Bible is just so marvelous that the same principle, this is the first time Babylon, that is why we call it the Tower of Babel. So Babel is the same as Babylon. Genesis chapter 11, that is the beginning of Babylon. Thousands of years later, we have King Nebuchadnezzar literally doing the same thing. Doing what? Doing the principle of Babylon, which means what? Using worship to serve personal interest. So he wanted the people to worship him because he is now the king of Babylon. And then he just put up a golden image, which in reality was to represent himself. And then everybody, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, you are to bow. Babylon is the use of religion. It is the use of worship. It is the use of sacrifice to serve personal needs, selfish interests, as they said, so that we will have a name for ourselves, instead of so that God will be glorified. If you want God to be glorified, then instead of using bricks, you use uncut stone. If you want God to be glorified, instead of using bitumen or asphalt, you are going to use clay. If you want God to be glorified, then instead of building a city for yourself, which is a mindset of selfishness, you will be building a mindset, the city of Zion, which represents the mindset of God. And then instead of building the tower, that is where sacrificing for your personal needs, you will be sacrificing for the glory of God. So the opposite of Babylon is Zion or Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the city of God. Zion is the mountain of God. So Babylon is the city of self. Babylon is the city of the flesh. And then Zion is the city of God. Jerusalem is the city of God. Jerusalem and Zion is the city of the spirit, whereas Babylon is the city of carnality and of the flesh, driven by personal needs. So let me try and then wrap up. I'm sure you are getting the point gradually. So I'll put it in two ways. One, how does this principle apply in your personal life? And then number two, how does it apply in a church as a system? So these are the two ways, and then I'll be done this evening. Because it is a principle, it can be expressive in your personal life, and then it can also find its way into a group of people. So I'll start with the personal life. I've defined the principle of Babylon is the use of worship, the use of religion, the use of the worship of God or sacrifices to God, but the mindset behind it is to serve personal needs. So in your personal life as a Christian, it is sad, but I must say the plain truth that many Christians in the world, especially in Ghana and Africa, they are worshiping God with the principle of Babylon. Instead of using the principle of Jerusalem or the principle of Zion, they are using the principle of Babylon. What do I mean? Anytime, let me ask you this question. Why are you a Christian? Why do you go to church on Sundays? Friday, all night. Can I ask you a humble question? All night now, wokono sabio adwin potia eda utrimu a eno nti ode compaibo no anything. Many believers, they are using God to serve their personal needs. Let me disappoint you that is not Christianity. That is Babylon. You may have a good name in the books of the church or in your denomination, but please, you may not be having a good name from Zion's perspective. Many believers in the church, the motivation for going to church and the motivation for what they are doing is because of their personal needs. And if you want to assess, you can easily assess this using our prayer topics. Just take a reflection at your prayer topics. How many times do you pray to intercede for your nation, to intercede even for the body of Christ? I wonder, say utimiko all night. Now all night now wakono from anajobe 10 o'clock to ahumachimbe 5 a.m. Bear says 7 hours. And you are using 7 hours to pray for your personal needs. I wonder how you can use 7 hours to be praying for your personal needs. You need an all night for 5 hours, 3 hours, 7 hours to be praying for job, to be praying for our rear. Eradima woyo, eradima makontoyo. God, I want to travel outside. Eradi breakthrough, eradi misikasem. When you take the lives of many Christians, They are not Christians because they have the desire to become like Christ. Their life is not undergoing construction to become more like Christ. And no, they ensheda en haumu. They haumu and say onia ware, onia wo. They hano and say or pese o yusu nyamesom as a means to get things for himself. And nunti oti testimony be say, oh, me call a sorry way. That is why some people they bia offering paibo baako ase na oko baako ase. Enti ye dieti e won twede. The reason is because ye persofwa or she or nam. The choice of the churches we attend, instead of seeking for places of doctrinal purity, that will be giving the true unadulterated word of God, that he said faith cometh by hearing and hearing by the word of God, so that we will be transformed. One of the Methodist hymns, love divine, all loves excelling. The last stanza, Charles Wesley said, change from glory into glory. So he said, finish then thy new creation. And then he said that change from glory into glory, till in heaven we take our place, till we cast our crowns before thee, lost in wonder, love, and praise. 2 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 18, that is where that he was taking it from. He said, but we all with unveiled faces, beholding us in a mirror, we are transformed into the image of Christ. The essence of Christianity is Christ-likeness. The essence of Christianity, Romans chapter 8 verse 29, or say, for them that he foreknew, he foreordained near dear no, so that they will be conformed to the image of his dear son. God is more interested in who you are becoming more than what you are doing. Sometimes you can become so zealous for the work of God that you focus so much on. And yet there are people doing the right thing. They are people who are in the city of Zion, but they are in the minority. There are people doing the right thing, but they're in the minority. So Babylon in your personal life is when a Christian uses God and